Well, good day, and thank you. It seems weird calling him Lieutenant Governor. Wouldn't say thank you, me, thank you, Lieutenant Governor, but thank you so much for that kind introduction. You know, the Lieutenant Governor's job is something I know a lot about since I was there at one point, and we also certainly learned the necessity of having a Lieutenant Governor in that line of succession. And it's not often easy being Lieutenant Governor, I gotta tell you that, because our Lieutenant Governors from Meade on back have been capable of far more than what they are permitted in that position. It's just the nature of the job that goes with it. So Meade, I appreciate you doing the work of that position. Also want to say thank you for allowing me to be an honorary member of the Downtown Rotary. It is an honor, but I have to tell you that I've noticed a few changes. I was once a member of South Anchorage Rotary, and there used to be happy bucks. And I'm here in high 20s and high 10s, and I'm thinking, what has changed around here? You know, inflation's gripped everybody. And so I came with a buck in my pocket, and then I thought, no, that's just cheap. I can't do that. But I'm gonna raise a high 20 here, and I understand that as an honorary member, I don't have to pay any fines, but I still ought to give thanks and praise when necessary and when needed. And in this case, my wife and I, Sandy, have been able to successfully launch our youngest daughter from high school as she graduated about a week and a half ago here in Anchorage. So here's a high 20 for Rachel and for all other high school graduates this year. So today, I am not going to stand up here and read a speech at you. I'm going to have an interactive dialogue with you. That's something that I know we've enjoyed before as this organization and me. It's something I'd like to do today. And while you're thinking of your questions, and I just would like you to stand up, identify yourself, ask a question. Let's have an interactive dialogue. I'm used to having the press do this. It's basically designed for me to hear from you and to permit you the accessibility to your governor that you deserve. It also sharpens me in terms of what's important to you, and it helps me serve you better in this role. The Lieutenant Governor was great about just spotlighting some of our good news, some of our achievements in this administration. I think Alaska is well positioned. So as you think about your question, just give me a minute. I think Alaska is well positioned economically. If you go anywhere else in this country, people are out of work, people are mad about can't find work. In this state, there is opportunity for work, and you might say we're flat economically or we're only slow growth, but if you go anywhere else, that opportunity isn't there. We've got immense resources still at our that we own and that we have the potential to access and to utilize and grow our economy. We've got educational opportunity. We've got VPSOs. We've got village public safety officers now by the end of this fiscal year, we'll have funded about 116 positions where 3 years ago, there were like 48 positions. That means that about 50 more communities actually have a law enforcement officer in them, which means that the costs of assaults and abuse go down because the numbers go down when you can actually call somebody and get help in a village where there is none, or there was none before. I think about our children, and I think about the runaways in this town, 48% of whom, if you use national statistics, 48% of whom become trafficking victims and get locked into a life of prostitution at 13, 14, and 15. And this year, we have signed into law some tougher penalties for trafficking, for sex trafficking, human trafficking as well, other important issues. So when I think about serving you as governor, I think about the economic side. I think about making sure that our budget is restrained and that we're actually pushing the growth of government down and increasing private sector opportunity. And I think about strengthening our families and giving families more opportunities, whether in the education arena, whether by public safety, the health arena. Those are all areas that we focus in. And finally, another priority is our military and military support. And the Lieutenant Governor mentioned that I was in Dillingham yesterday and attended a Memorial Day ceremony there. Probably one of the most touching Memorial Day ceremonies I've been to. They actually gave an American flag to every family in Dillingham that had lost somebody in a war. They gave out about 90 flags in a town that size, in a community that size. Honor Guard gave the military honors to each family, one by one by one. And we also honored our Alaska Territorial Guard. We heard stories of 1942 when the Japanese Empire was on a roll, attacking our shores, Nazi U-boats. It sunk about 500 American ships coming off of our North American shores. Nobody was fighting, nobody was able to help stop those winds by our enemies of the time. Governor Greening got in a float plane, I'm told, and flew to about 100 villages and raised up the Alaska Territorial Guard. Flew into Dillingham. It was his first stop, I guess, out of Anchorage is how the story went. Got off there, contacted one of his friends in that community, gave him the sign-up sheet, said this is what we need. We need to raise up a Territorial Guard to guard our country and our state. And in short order, about 6,400 men, women, teenagers answered the call. They were never given veteran status, even though they served our country, until about 12 years ago. And we've spent the last 4 years or so working to get the surviving members of the Alaska Territorial Guard their discharge papers, because they too served our country and deserve that kind of recognition and the benefits that flow from that, as do their families. So it was our honor to provide those discharge papers and certificates to 4 Alaska Territorial Guard members in Dillingham who had not received them nor received the honor of their service before. So we're very proud to have done that. So that's just a snapshot, just real briefly in terms of where we are in the cycle as your governor. The legislature, as you know, is done for the year. Did you see that smile on my face? I love our legislators. You know, there's some things we worked well together on, and other things were really tough. Worked well on the budget. The Lieutenant Governor mentioned the spending limit. That took us 3 years to get there, but we worked well together on limiting state spending and the growth there. Difficulties, of course, with oil and with trying to incentivize production and bringing that back online. But some huge successes with our administration in resolving Point Thompson, getting alignment on a large diameter gas line, the All-Alaska gas line, through our state to Tidewater in our state with the 3 producers in TransCanada, resolving long-standing litigation like the Moore case and the Kasaili case, education-related cases to bring equity to rural Alaska when it comes to education funding and opportunity. Lots of good news, but instead of me preparing a text for you, let's have some interactive dialogue. I'd like to hear from you, ask a question, make a statement, but then I'll work with you on providing some info. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Joe. Governor Parnell, Russell Pounds, thanks for joining us today. And I wonder if you could comment on the things that you are interested in or excited about in the technology sector. You know, Anand is here with ACS. Maybe it's telecommunications, or maybe it's connectivity around the state. Could you just talk about that for a moment?
Well, certainly. For me, the broadband initiative is one key area that I appreciate. The fact that telecommunications enables business, that enables our lives to be better. And so the broadband initiative going forward, but also just assuring that our rural communities have access to telecommunication networks, because that is one way that they can survive economically and can utilize that for commerce. So if you have some ideas on areas you'd like us to focus on specifically, why don't you stand up and tell me? No? You're not going to? Take an opportunity to tell me what to do? Okay. Yes?
I think 4 years ago we agreed that the state and the federal government build a visitor center at mile 136 of the Parks Highway. The state has funded about $12 million for the road construction. Where are we with building the facility there?
That's a good question, and that's one I do not know the answer to, but I've got some good people here who will take a note, and we can get back with you on that. Thank you. It sounds like one of those situations where we did our part, but they haven't reciprocated yet, but I'll find out. So, Mr. Bell.
Governor, I'm trying to think. I'm going to ask you how you're going to get microphone.
Microphone, hang on. We got a microphone for Bell?
I'll give it back to her. I'm sure you think I'm going to ask you about how you're going to get oil taxes through the Senate, but I'm not. All of these other things seem to overwhelm the Watana Dam Susitna project. Could you bring us up to speed on that?
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you asked that, because in the energy, from an energy perspective, this will bring relief and long-term economic growth opportunities for the entire rail belt and probably beyond as well. So 2 years ago with the legislature, we set a statewide policy where we said, as a state, we want to see by 2025 50% of our electricity generation and transmission to come from renewable sources. So Watana, that hydropower project, is a key ingredient to reaching that goal. If we don't have Watana, we will diminish our opportunity to have that renewable energy and that affordable energy across a lot of years. So a year and a half ago, a little over a year ago, we provided 2 years worth of funding to the Alaska Energy Authority, to their project team for Watana. They're engaged in the design aspect right now and in licensing with FERC. So this is a project that is very important to us as administration. We'll continue working it hard, but it's resident now in AEA and moving forward. Oh wait, go ahead.
Governor Parnell, my name is Barbara Bundy. I'm really excited to hear about the Choose Respect, and I know that many of us know that violent crime and domestic violence have been a huge problem for many, many years, and I'm wondering if there's anything in this Choose Respect program, if there's anything that we're looking at that's sort of innovative or different, hasn't been tried before. Maybe we're looking to other places in the country or the world that have similar problems. Is there anything kind of new and different, or are we just sort of doing what we've been doing but more so?
You know, I think we are writing a new page in history for our entire Northern Hemisphere. And let me describe that. The Choose Respect initiative has prevention components, intervention, enforcement components, and then the support services component. You've heard me talk about this before, but let's talk about prevention for a moment. I really think that this is going to start with us as individuals, and that's, government is not going to be able to solve this. This is going to be up to Alaskans to step forward and be the answer. So 2010, 18 communities participated in Choose Respect rallies on March 31st of that year to raise awareness and to stand and take a stand for Alaskans and show some courage that we're willing to talk about this. We're willing to give permission to speak about this epidemic among us. Last year in 2011, about 63 or 64 communities joined that same effort. This year, over 120 communities. There is nowhere else in the Northern Hemisphere that I'm aware of, North America, where anything like this has caught fire, at least not in the last 40 years. The last time I can think about when something like this might have happened were the civil rights demonstrations, civil rights marches in the 60s. And really, it is us as Alaskans standing up for our fellow citizens saying, you deserve dignity, you deserve respect, you don't deserve the abuse. Those of you who have experienced it in your own homes, you don't deserve to carry that shame and that guilt. And as Alaskans, we are opening up and giving permission to speak about these things because they are so harmful to individuals and collectively to our community. So there's that element. There's also government funding in the prevention side. There's about $12 million more with pilot projects in Dillingham and Bethel and throughout other areas of our state. The enforcement side of it, I touched on it a little bit before when I talked about our communities in rural Alaska. Many don't have access to law enforcement. You can pick up a phone and try to get help, and it's 3 days, 4 days away because there's no officer in the community. There's no village VPSO, VPO, or trooper, nobody. And when I came into office, I said, we're going to fund at least 15 VPSOs per year, plus the trooper support, to put them into communities, because objectively, we know from studies that if you have a law enforcement presence in a community, the number of assaults diminishes, and the safety of that community increases. Otherwise, we wouldn't have law enforcement. So we've kept our promise, and we've moved 15 per year, plus the trooper support behind them. I just spoke yesterday in Dillingham with a new VPSO in Manicodic. He received 10 weeks of training at the Sitka Training Academy through Public Safety and is now on the job. I asked the Dillingham trooper yesterday, I went into the Public Safety office and I said, tell me what your biggest concerns, your most reported, your reasons for having to respond to the public? And he said, alcohol, domestic violence, tandem. So we've got prevention efforts, we've got increased law enforcement efforts, we've also increased our support services when it comes to shelter beds and services in this state. But it's going to take a comprehensive approach to end the epidemic. I'm not naive enough to think that we will ever get rid of this crime, but I am idealistic enough to believe in the power of Alaskans to make a difference in other people's lives when we're willing to step up and step in. Thanks.
Governor, thank you for coming to address us. Flip Todd, can you tell us how optimistic you are that Shell will be able to proceed with drilling in the Beaufort and the Chukchi Sea this summer?
You know, that is one of a few bright spots in our economy. Is I am much more optimistic this summer than prior years. I'm always cautious though, because we've been here before. We've been in this place where the ships have been on the way, the drill ship's on its way, contractors are on their way, and then we've been turned back either by a lawsuit or by a federal agency in action or opposing action. But this year I am cautiously optimistic that they'll be able to go forward. And when I look at the North Slope, I see that as a huge economic opportunity for Alaska. I also see Point Thompson as a huge economic opportunity for Alaskans. If that settlement that we negotiated requires billions of dollars of spend that will be invested within the next 1 to 3 years to take them to liquids production from Point Thompson. So you've got offshore work at OCS, you've got Point Thompson work escalating as well. My real desire is also to move forward in our own oil patch on state lands and to turn the production decline to an incline to 1 million barrels a day. That's what this whole effort has been about in terms of changing our tax structure at these high oil prices. That's something I have some hope for the future. Obviously that was dashed this year by those who prefer to just manage for status quo decline and say we're doing fine, thank you. I'm not willing to accept that. And I think we're on a path where Alaskans are better informed and where our legislators are better informed, and my hope is we can come back next year and continue the fight. Head over here.
Governor Matt Clayman, going back to the Susitna-Watana Dam, I've been troubled by the lack of really detailed economic analysis. My concern is that when I look through the lower 48, dams that size, they stopped building them 40 and 50 years ago, and most of the economic analysis looking back has said it really didn't pay out, and those were dams that actually held melting purposes as opposed to just energy. My concern with the Susitna Dam is this enormous project that's only going to happen if there's this huge state subsidy, and I've got questions about, is that really where we should be spending state money if there isn't really a significant return for it? And I'm wondering what kind of economic analysis has been done before spending even millions already, but I think to build it is going to be billions and billions.
So what you're saying is that every government project on infrastructure should be profitable? Is that what you're saying, that we should? I'm kidding,
No,
Matt.
actually, I'm happy to respond.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be profitable, but I think there's a point at which if you're going to spend, for example, some of the smaller hydro projects, if there's a $50 million or even $100 million government investment, and then there's a much bigger payback in the long term,
Yeah.
that makes, to me, a lot more sense than spending billions, which might well be better spent on other things that might actually produce more jobs, produce more opportunities, and actually do more to reduce energy.
Well, first off, I would urge, and I don't, Matt, I'm not trying to treat your question flip. That's not my intent, and because these are very serious questions. But at the same time, the need for a long-term renewable energy source in this rail belt is important, and I think those are questions that I'd be happy to tell AEA to get up here and provide some response to. It's not about the state writing a check for billions of dollars. It's about writing a check for a portion of it and financing the rest, and how that gets recovered. And that's exactly those are the questions that you should be asking. They're questions that we have. Until we have a design and a public process, it's hard to know exactly where that will fall, but I'm happy to have them come give a briefing on that.
Governor Dena'ina Daniels here. I have a question about Arctic policy. We heard from Fran Ulmer recently at our club, and she gave us kind of a primer on some of the key issues we really ought to be aware of here as Alaskans. There were a number of policy issues raised, the law of the sea and some other initiatives, and it really just kind of makes me wonder, how should we as a state be organizing ourselves as just a state of one nation that is considered an Arctic nation? And how do we avoid the party politics and actually do what's best for Alaska?
Every policy we implement here is part of our Arctic policy. You know, there's not one policy like erosion, for instance, of our shores and the corresponding threat to our communities that can be stated as, you know, anything less than an Arctic policy. So our oil policy is an Arctic policy. Our housing policy is an Arctic policy. So everything that we do is focused on life in the Arctic for Alaskans and towards maximizing the benefit of those resources for Alaskans and the like. Now, I can tell you that we interact with Arctic considerations and specific to Arctic considerations at places like the Arctic Council, where our Lieutenant Governor is the liaison for the state of Alaska. And so I can just tell you that there is nothing that we do in this state that is not geared towards the Arctic, because that's where we live. And we've done a good job, I think, of educating Washington to turn to us when they have Arctic issues. So Lieutenant Governor and I have each testified with respect to the need for an icebreaker. We've put money into the budget to study and figure out where a new Arctic port should be on the western or northwestern coast of Alaska. So there are policy items like that that are individual and specific, but they're within the umbrella of everything we do reflects Arctic policy of our state. And I never want to lose sight of that. So if you have suggestions on how we might specifically move differently, you know, please let us know.
Governor John Wanamaker here. I have a quick comment. I've always been a fan of the performance scholarship.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you can recap where it stands now and what happened in this process.
That is one of our significant wins, I think, for Alaska, and Alaskans will win for generations at this point. 2 years ago, we passed criteria for the Alaska Performance Scholarship and said if you young people are willing to take more rigorous coursework than the minimums required to graduate from high school, you can earn these scholarships. And depending upon your grades, the scholarships vary from about $4,700 at the top to about $2,300 at the bottom end of the scholarships. I've seen more young people who have been able to take advantage of having earned these scholarships and using them here in state, and they stay in state. Now this year, we were able to complete a funding mechanism that is sustainable on a long-term basis for these scholarships. It's called the Higher Education Fund. We put $400 million into the fund, and we will live off the interest and earnings of the fund. So we now have criteria established, and we have a sustainable funding mechanism for the Alaska Performance Scholarships. The Higher Education Fund, as part of the, I'll tell you, as part of the compromise to get it through the House and Senate, we had to coordinate and cooperate and allow not only the performance scholarship funds to come from there, but the Alaska Advantage program, which is the needs-based grant program as well. So what's left, perhaps, is still to put a smaller infusion of cash into that fund, but there is enough money for the performance scholarships at this juncture. What that's going to do, it's going to mean it's in the first year, the class of 2011, the high school class of 2011, that class made use of those performance scholarships, and the university reported that they had less need for remedial coursework on a percentage basis among that entering class. So this year, you'll have the 2011 cohort in the university system and job training as well. And you'll have the 2012 cohort of students, all who are using those scholarships, who have taken more math, more science, etc. It will raise the level of academic achievement, and it will raise the quality of the employers you get in your company. So for example, instead of, one company just told me in the last week as I spoke with them about their economics and their hiring, it told me that they have to take in about 12 applications to find one that's really qualified just for basic reading, writing, and math skills. That should not be. That's not what our schools should be turning out. And this performance scholarship is already lifting the bar and incenting young people to take more rigorous coursework than the minimums required. Now, there's also something else that's happening. Our administration, in coordination with the Board of Education, is increasing the high school graduation standards. Those should be in place in June. There's been a public comment process this entire spring, but we're also making our graduation requirements tougher along with the performance scholarship. So, thank you for the question.
Governor, Jean Hellenthal, nice to have you here today, and congratulations on becoming a member. I wanted to go back to the topic of the domestic violence, and about 20 years ago I was on the Awake Board. And at that time, there was a lot of misunderstanding about the violence. First of all, it was believed that it happened only in low-income places, and also that it only happened with men abusing women. And since then, the whole discussion has changed, and it's changed partly because of people like you showing the leadership to come out and make it a topic of conversation that we can all talk about, so people, their level of awareness is raised. And 20 years ago, when you were a legislator, you were one of our biggest supporters and one of the people that helped us change the dialogue and raise the level of awareness. So I want to thank you for a very long commitment to this effort.
Well, thank you, and I want to, it was actually my legislative service that made me first aware of the issue here in Anchorage. It was my ride-along with Anchorage police officers that did that, and I realized that this issue is not limited, as you said, to any gender, to any economic status or group. And it's something that I don't find comfortable to talk about. I don't like to talk about it, but we must. It's almost akin to, and this is an easier topic to talk about now than it was, but 35 years ago, had you, or even 40 years ago, had you tried to take the car keys away from your friend after they'd been drinking at a party, you probably would have been punched. But today, you designate drivers, you can take the keys away from your friend and say, I'm going to drive you, and that's accepted behavior. Well, I'd like that to be an accepted conversation to have among friends and family, to say, can I get you some help, And like I said, I don't like talking about these issues, but we must if we're going to stop the cancer that's eating us from within. So thank you for that. Yeah. Oh, we got a microphone here. I'm sorry. He already beat you to it.
Governor, welcome back to Rotary. I'm Neil Thomas. I'd like to ask about public pension funds and some of these other endowments. There's been some interesting things written lately about how these funds are all predicated on the idea that they will get returns of like 7 or 8%.
Right.
And for all that we love having low-cost consumer loans and business loans, is it really realistic, and can we budget based on the idea that these funds won't have to be subsidized because they really will earn that much?
Well, we already are, and let me kind of describe something that happened here. Our pension system, particularly the Tier 1, we're now at about Tier 4 plus now, but the earlier state pensions and local government pensions as well effectively dug a hole through, in part, stock market, lower expectations, or expectations realized that were lower than expected in 2008 and beyond. The bottom line is those pensions accrued a liability on the magnitude of about $11 billion is where that liability stands now. So every year as a state, we're writing a check. This year it's about $610 million just against that unfunded liability. In addition to that, we're having to make payments for existing employees' pensions for the state's contribution. So the question for us is, how do you manage that $11 billion unfunded liability? Because under our Constitution, that pension is a promise. We'll make good on the pensions, but the question is, how do you do it in a smart fashion? right now, that $11 billion liability, which we're helping municipal governments with as a state, and the state is paying for its own, that $11 billion liability is being paid off on an annual basis, and it's going to increase on an annual basis from $610 million. It's going to climb to over $1 billion, and then it will decrease as our pensioners pass on. That's one way to meet that unfunded liability. Another way is to increase that annual payment to about $800+ million, almost $900 million, and pay it like a flat mortgage. And then another way to do it is to simply say, look, we got billions in the bank, let's take a few billion and dump it into pensions, and then we get to your problem. You know, if you dump it into a pension plan, you lose that flexibility with that cash to hold it as cash, and if they invested in the stock market or poorly, it's gone. We saw that with the judicial retirement system. We put $49 million into it a couple years back, and then the value of the pension plunged, and we still owe the same amount. So far, we have taken the approach that we're going to make the annual payments, maintain the flexibility with our cash, but we're still going to make good on those pensions. So I will tell you that the legislature in 2003 or 4 changed that pension program so that it is no longer a defined benefit, but for new employees coming in, it's a defined contribution plan, which we're paying for past liability, accrued liability, and won't have that going forward unless that retirement system changes again. So thanks. I mean, that's if you think about the federal government having issues with Social Security and Medicare, our financial issue is going to be, and is that pension unfunded liability.
Last question.
Governor, thank you for attending. My name is Jim Ferguson. Our long-range transportation plan, where are we on that? Our roads are deteriorating. There are more people on the same amount of roads, and we're not funding our roads or maintenance or that. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. First off, we are funding, but probably not to your satisfaction. And I'll give you an example. When I came into office as governor, I said we need to take care of the assets we have. So we've never set aside money for deferred maintenance before. I said, here's our 5-year plan. We're going to put $100 million towards deferred maintenance. About 37 of that will go to maintain roads and streets. Another chunk goes to the university, another chunk goes to public buildings, trying to keep our assets from deteriorating. In addition to that, the DOT budget has maintenance funding as well. The bottom line is, can we do more? Absolutely. Here in Anchorage, I want to say that the roads, counting the Seward Highway and the work there, we'll see roughly $100 million to $110 million worth of new work, both in town in terms of maintenance, as well as headed out of town. Winter and construction will be the 2 seasons for the next few years here. But can we do more? We absolutely can. And what I'd encourage you to do as a Rotary is to invite our DOT Commissioner, Mark Lucan, to come lay out the long-range transportation plan for you, so you can see what that looks like. Okay. And I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here.